All right, guys, another addition to our $110,000 portfolio allocation strategy. If you joined us on the first two videos, welcome back. If you haven't seen the first two videos, I highly suggest you go back and watch those so you can understand what we're doing and follow along. The essence of this video series is to allocate a $110,000 portfolio. We've got the scenario of an individual who may be on the sidelines in the stock market looking at these charts saying, look, the stock markets are at all-time highs. I don't want to allocate everything in now. If we have a correction, which we're starting to see happen as markets roll over, then we don't want to be losing a bunch of money and buying at highs and, having a number of years before we catch back up. So we, through backtesting, have identified a little bit of a portfolio mix here that we're working towards. So with $100,000 for our main portfolio, we are looking at allocating 40% of that in the NASDAQ, 35% in the total stock market index fund, 10% in gold, 10% in TLT, and 5% in cash. And then we've got another $10,000 that is set aside for individual stock picks. And last week, we actually added a position in AMD. So with that said, we are going to add today to GLD after a pretty decent correction, I would say. In GLD, I want to say we're probably about what percentage off of highs here? We're trading at about 245 out of 258. So just to do some quick math, we're actually trading about 5 to 6% off the all-time highs on gold. I like this as a little bit of an opportunity for us to go ahead and get a starter position in here. So I'm looking at about $2,000 is what we're going to add today on our gold. And then we're actually going to start a position on another stock pick here on Moderna. And then we'll talk through the actual strategy. As I click the wrong button here, we'll talk through the strategy behind these stock picks in a moment. But here we go. We're going to go ahead and add $2,000 to GLD. So GLD is trading at about $246. GLD is the index fund for gold. Tracks almost identical to the gold futures market. We need about 8 shares, so we're going to go ahead and add 8 shares here. We're going to go buy, and we're using Thinkorswim here, by the way. This is a Charles Schwab platform that I highly recommend for those who are getting into trading and investing. So we're going to do the market's closed now. We'll probably have to do a limit order here. And for those who were on the last video, we're going to do a limit, good till canceled, plus extended hours. Those who were on the last video, we did get that fill on the QQQ on the NASDAQ. So we are in. You can actually see our positions here. We've got TLT. We're at a small loss. We are in the NASDAQ for a slight gain, and then AMD for a slight gain as well. So you can see our open positions here and total P&L at the bottom. So we're going to go ahead and get that order placed, and that will hopefully fill over probably the next day. I don't know if we're going to get the fill in the overnight session here since the market is currently closed. We have the after hours trading going on. We'll see if we can get a fill on that. But with that said, we're going to also look at adding to Moderna. So Moderna, first of all, I'll go back to AMD for a second. AMD I've been following for quite a while, and the chips sector, chips, semiconductors are obviously a very hot market. You look at NVIDIA and the growth of NVIDIA over the past couple of years, it's just been phenomenal growth. And you have stocks like AMD and Intel that have been really lagging and struggling behind. Those are really the primary players in these markets when you look at chip makers for CPUs and computers. I mean, I am currently talking to you from an AMD powered computer. I've got an AMD Ryzen chipset. I've got an AMD Radeon graphics card. AMD and Intel are really those two big players outside of NVIDIA. And Intel has had CEO step down. They've had all kinds of issues with the company, and that stock is not doing too well. But AMD is still positioned pretty well. As a company, I think they've got a pretty strong financials, and they had a pretty massive sell-off last week, so we got in at about 115 there. I like the company in general. I do think that it's a little bit overly beaten up, the stock here, and I think there's some good opportunity for risk to reward and a lot of room for the upside. Now, Moderna was interesting. We actually had some news when we were looking at the bird flu outbreak and them having a breakthrough on vaccines for the bird flu. We saw the stock actually gap up about 15% to $48, almost $49, and then now it's gapped down as they've actually forecasted earnings setbacks and slower revenue growth as not as many people are getting vaccinations, and they're still obviously working through the various vaccines that are going to make sense going forward. So they had a pretty big gap down here. I actually like getting in on a position at least to a gap fill, if not a little bit further up here. As you can see this gap down on the chart, I mean, our price target for the first target would be about $42. And then we're going to see if we can retest those previous highs on that gap up before they had announced that they're expecting lower projections for revenue growth. So we're going to go ahead and get in a position here as well. As I mentioned, we're going to get about $1,000. So $1,000, we're trading at about $35 a share. We're going to look to get about 29 shares of Moderna. We're going to do the same thing, a limit order, good till canceled at about 34.9. Place that order. See if it gets filled in the overnight or this after hours session. If not, it will likely be filled by the next time we do a future video. So we've got those shares. We've got the GLD position. So again, the goal here is to get everything allocated as follows. We want to have about $40,000 in the NASDAQ. We're at about 6,500 allocated right now out of the 40. Nothing in SPY or VTI right now. 2,000 in gold. We got 6,000 in TLT and the rest sitting in cash. And then we're allocating $10,000 in stock picks where we currently have AMD and Moderna. So 2,500, 25% of the 10,000 allocated. So that is what we're looking at right now. I am waiting on a little bit of a further correction here in the markets. We may or may not get that, so we may end up adding a little bit more to the NASDAQ on the dips. We may actually get into SPY sooner rather than later. What I've actually noticed in the charts here that's interesting, and I'd like to see what happens with the rest of the week here, especially Tuesday, Wednesday, we have PPI and CPI, so inflation metrics data, and the market's getting a little bit fearful that inflation is going to pick back up. I don't necessarily buy that case. I think that maybe short-term inflation, some of these short-term economic indicators have highlighted that inflation might be starting to rise, but I don't suspect that's going to maintain its course. With that said, we had this gap up from the election with the Trump victory from November 5th to November 6th, which was right here. So from about 285 up to about 292. And what we've essentially done on the chart is we've rolled over, sold off, and filled that gap. So the chart is no longer having this gap because price has now gone back down, filled the gap, and then we've seen a bit of a rebound here. And that is looking pretty similar. We're getting pretty close, I would say, with the NASDAQ, although that gap likely was already filled back on the 15th of November, where we had a gap up and then a rollover, and then we headed higher. We could see that gap back down, though. I'm going to make an alert. We'll keep track of it. But I would like to buy any additional dips here. This may be the most of the correction that we get for now. I don't know. We're off about 5% from all-time highs on the SPY or the S&P 500. We're down about 7 to 8% on the NASDAQ. And then if you look at the Dow and the Russell, they're actually more lagging, but not part of this portfolio strategy that we've back-tested, where we're looking to get into VTI, the NASDAQ as the two primary positions. So that's what we're looking at. We're going to add to gold. We're going to add to Moderna, and we will talk again on the next episode as soon as we get some more market action to jump into. So thanks for listening, guys, and we'll talk again soon. Thanks a lot.